For our first video today, we are going to discuss water. And water is one of the most essential molecules for life. We would not survive without it. And it is necessary for living things all across the planet. And this is part of section A1.1 and our first section of IB Bio. Water is a medium for life, and most likely the formation of first cells involved a small amount of water becoming enclosed within a membrane. And this would allow substances that dissolved within the membrane for chemical reactions to take place within that medium. The cytoplasm inside of our cells contains quite a bit of water. And so that's probably how one of the ways that cells used water to begin with. After years and years, millions of years of evolution, most life molecules are still held within water, and water allows molecules to move and interact in a relatively easy way and an easy medium. And so water is essential for life, and in this video we're going to look at some of the characteristics and features of water. Water is made up of two different atoms, hydrogen and oxygen, and it's probably a review for you. Hydrogen ions are used for a variety of purposes in biology: active transport, photosynthesis, cell respiration, all of these processes that we'll see a little bit later on. pH is commonly associated with hydrogen ions, and pH stands for potential hydrogen, and it measures the activity of dissolved hydrogen ions within a medium, within a liquid. A low pH, 1 to 6 on the scale, represents an acid, whereas a higher value, 8 to 14, represents a base, and 7 is neutral. Hydrogen is also a foundation element for organic molecules. Oxygen, there's one oxygen atom found in each water molecule. There are two hydrogen atoms. Oxygen is used during aerobic respiration. It's what we breathe in to be able to survive. It's used to accept electrons following the production of ATP, and so it's also used in a lot of different biological processes that we will discuss throughout this course. An individual water molecule is made up of two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. The oxygen carries a slightly negative charge because it pulls the electrons from the hydrogen a little bit towards it, and so that gives it a slightly negative charge, and thus leaves the hydrogens being a slightly positive charge. And as we can see in the picture, this is what creates this distribution or separation of charges. This is what creates something called polarity. And a polar molecule is one in which the charges of that molecule are not equal or balanced. They're slightly different between different parts of that molecule. And so we have one portion that's slightly negative, that's the oxygen, and one portion that's slightly positive. Those would be the hydrogen regions. Water molecules have the unique property or ability to be able to form bonds. And obviously within the water molecule itself, the hydrogen and the oxygens are bound together, and they are done so by covalent bonds. Because of the polarity of the water molecule, though, it can also bond to other water molecules. And this is what we call a hydrogen bond. And this is a bond between two different or more water molecules in which the negative oxygen of one atom is attracted to the positive hydrogen of a different water molecule. You've probably heard the phrase opposites attract. That is exemplified here, where the negative oxygen of one water molecule is attracted to the positive hydrogen of a different water molecule. And this hydrogen bond that forms, we'll see lots throughout biology, is essential to living things. It's not as strong as a covalent bond. It's a weaker bond, and so it can be broken somewhat easily, which is also very important for other aspects of biology. One of the properties of water that develops because of some of its characteristics is called cohesion. And this is bonding between two of the same types of molecule, water in this case. It's caused by hydrogen bonds, so it goes along with much of what we've just talked about. It's useful and necessary for transport within plants, for diffusion, a concept that we'll talk about a little bit later, but the movement from high locations to low locations. Energy is required to break that hydrogen bond, and so cohesion is essential to many living things, and we'll combine it with another topic here in a minute that will help explain some of its importance. Within plants, there is a structure called the xylem, and it's kind of like a hollow tube within the plant, and that's how water moves up vertically within the plant, and tension forces pulling on water helps to suck water vertically from the roots to the leaves. And this happens because as water evaporates from the leaves, this creates that pulling tension, that pulling force. And so it's just like if you were to use a straw, as you begin to pull water out of the straw, it sucks more water up from the bottom of the straw. Same idea, except that the straw is the xylem within the plant, and there's not a human that's pulling the water. It happens because of evaporation. And so cohesion is necessary in that because the water molecules stick together through hydrogen bonds. And so as they start to get pulled and that tension pulls the water, they continue to travel because of the attraction to one another due to cohesion. Within water habitats, this is also beneficial to some organisms. Because water is more attracted to one another than to the air, this causes or creates surface tension. And as a result, it's possible for some objects to be able to float. You've probably seen little water striders around in ponds or streams. This happens as a result of surface tension. These organisms are able to float around on the top of the water, and the cohesion between water molecules due to those hydrogen bonds is greater than the attractions between water and the floating object, and so they're able to rest and literally move around on top of the water. This benefits them because they can walk on the surface. Mosquito larvae, which may be not beneficial for us, but they're able to hang from the surface of water. And so cohesion is very essential to many different types of organisms. Adhesion is the second property, or the third property, that occurs as a result of water. And this is the bonding between water and other polar molecules. And so this is useful in leaves where water adheres to the cellulose molecules in cell walls. And as we previously talked about water being able to move vertically within the plants, this is also a part of that process. So water sticks to other water molecules through cohesion, and within adhesion, the water molecules are sticking to other molecules. In this case, the cellulose, which is a type of carbohydrate that's found within the cell walls of plants. An additional property of water is the ability of capillary action, in which within a porous material, when it changes from an air-filled to a water-filled, it results in the formation of hydrogen bonds within that porous material, and that releases some energy. And this porous material then has, because of this, strong suction. It will suck up the water forces through, and that happens through adhesion. I would think of or envision it as like a paper towel sucking up the water. And you've probably seen this before, the water spreads throughout the paper towel very quickly. That is because of capillary action. Water is also an excellent solvent, meaning that it's able to dissolve lots of different materials. And it's able to do this because of its polarity. You maybe have heard the phrase before, water is the universal solvent. And no, it cannot dissolve everything, but it can dissolve a lot of things because of its polarity. And what type of molecules can it dissolve or act as a solvent for? Those that are polar. And again, polar means that the molecule has a separation of charges, and so water has that negative end for the oxygen and the positive side for the hydrogen. And then because of this polar nature, water molecules form a shell around charged polar molecules, and it prevents them from clumping together and keeping the solution. So if you add sugar or salt, both molecules that are polar, to water, eventually, it might take a little bit of time, but eventually those water molecules surround the individual sugar or salt molecules and help to break it down, to cause it to dissolve. Water forms hydrogen bonds with those polar molecules and allows it to be a solvent, or to break apart and dissolve those different molecules. Molecules that can be dissolved or like water are referred to as hydrophilic. Hydro being water, philic meaning loving. And the opposite of that, those that don't interact or mix with water are called or referred to as hydrophobic. Hydro again being water, phobic is like afraid of, like a phobia. And you can probably think about if you've ever had to clean dishes after cooking, in order to break up particular substances that are in those dishes, those pots, those pans, sometimes you need soap. And that soap is helping to break up fat or grease. And that's because fat is hydrophobic. It doesn't mix with water. And so in the case of cleaning up after you're cooking your food, you would need to use soap to be able to help that. And this is somewhat related specifically within biology, more specifically with transport within the blood. Within our blood system, in humans, we have different molecules that get transported: glucose, amino acids, cholesterol, fat, sugar, salt. Some of these can be transported just within the bloodstream because of their polarity. Those that can't, including cholesterol and fats, need some assistance because they're hydrophobic and they're unable to. And so they get transported throughout the bloodstream by a complex, a molecule called a lipoprotein. It's basically a little capsule of protein that they're placed inside of, and then they can be transported through the blood system. Plants also need to be able to transport things, not through their blood system, but through their different tissues, vascular tissues, the xylem and the phloem. And within the xylem, which transports water, minerals are also transported through that water. And so the water is able to dissolve those minerals that are hydrophilic and polar. And then sucrose, a type of sugar, can be transported in the phloem also because it's hydrophilic and is dissolvable by water. And so water is, while it's not able to dissolve everything, it's not a completely universal solvent. It's really able to transport many different molecules, and those specifically that are polar. Water is really an amazing molecule because it has so many different properties that are essential for our life. As we mentioned at the beginning of the video, we would not be able to survive without water, and these properties and characteristics of water just continue. And one of those is buoyancy. Objects that are in a fluid, that fluid exerts an upwards force that's equal to the weight of the fluid displaced by the object. And this is called buoyancy, and this is what allows boats and other things to float. They're buoyant, they're able to float in the liquid. Objects that are less dense than the fluid density have a greater force, thus allowing that object to be able to float. Objects that are more dense then sink. And I have a very limited background in physics, so I can't really explain all of the physics behind buoyancy. But this is a property that's essential to biology and to living things, as a variety of different living things depend on it to be able to float and to be able to move through the water. A further property is the viscosity of water, and viscosity is the thickness of a fluid and how easily it can flow and move. Water has a high viscosity, much higher than compared to other organic solvents. And seawater is more viscous than fresh, so it moves or flows more easily. And this can really impact marine organisms and their ability to move through the water. Makes it really interesting when we're comparing organisms that are able to survive in both seawater, marine, and freshwater, some of the adaptations that they've developed to be able to survive that. Water also has a high thermal conductivity, and this is the rate at which heat passes through the substance. And so heat passes through water relatively quickly in comparison to other substances. Fats and oils are good insulators, about 25% improvement. And so this is one of the reasons why we see some marine organisms contain a lot of blubber, fat that helps them to lose heat less quickly. But on the other hand, water is also useful to absorb and transfer heat. So as you're exercising and your muscles are producing heat, your blood, which contains a large proportion of water, is able to transfer that heat from your muscles to other parts of your body to help your muscles stay within relatively safe ranges. It's difficult for organisms, warm-blooded animals and organisms, to maintain their temperature on land, as air has less thermal conductivity of water. So both positive and negatives from a living standpoint, water having a high thermal conductivity. Another interesting aspect of water is that it takes a lot of energy for water to change temperature. And this is due to the need to be able to break hydrogen bonds within the water molecules. And this is also known as the specific heat. And that is the amount of energy that's required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of the substance by 1 degree Celsius. And water requires about 4 times as much energy to be able to change temperatures as compared to air. And so this actually helps to create a really stable environment for marine organisms. Large bodies of water take a lot of energy to change temperatures. And so for organisms that live within the water itself, it helps to create a stable environment, and it also has the benefit of areas of land around those large bodies of water have a little bit more stable temperatures. And so this helps to provide stable environments for many types of organisms, birds, mammals, other organisms that live in or around those large bodies of water. If we then think about the comparison of environments for organisms in the air or water, there's some big differences between them and some advantages and disadvantages for both. Each of these environments possess and have different characteristics that act on the organisms living within the environment. Air has less thermal conductivity, and it actually acts as an insulator. However, it has a lower heat capacity and is more prone to temperature changes. And so those would be some benefits and disadvantages for organisms that live primarily in air. Whereas water has greater thermal conductivity, so it moves heat away. And on the opposite end, it has a higher specific heat, so it resists changes in temperature. So water is a little bit more stable in the sense that the temperature doesn't change as much, but it's more difficult to maintain heat because it moves away. Whereas on the other hand, air is more prone to temperature changes, but actually acts as an insulator. And so because of these two different characteristics of air versus water, if we look at the organisms that we find in these different environments, because of these characteristics, it helps us to see and to start to better understand why some of the organisms that live in these different environments have some of the characteristics that they do. As we mentioned, seals and other whales and other marine organisms have blubber to help insulate them and maintain that heat. So we know water is essential to life, and it has a number of essential characteristics that help life to survive on our planet. Where then did water originate from? And there's a number of hypotheses. Probably the most accepted hypothesis is that an asteroid collided with Earth that brought water to Earth. There's about 1.4 billion cubic kilometers of water on Earth, and about 98% of that is in a liquid state. Most of that is salt water, so not water that we're able to consume, but the vast majority of it is a liquid state. It's probably unlikely that there was water on the planet during Earth's formation, as the temperatures were so high that water would have evaporated off. And so then how did water get here and stay here? Probably an asteroid. The image here indicates findings from astronomy that asteroids contain water and can contain water still today. Some possible factors that support this, that asteroids brought water and it is now is found on the planet. The distance between the Earth and the Sun, because of that distance, ensures now, because of our atmosphere and other conditions, that the temperatures don't rise high enough for the water to boil and evaporate due to cohesion factors between the water molecules, and so water stays on the planet today. We also have pretty strong gravity on Earth, and so that helps to hold the oceans and gases within our atmosphere. And so these are just, this hypothesis is based on the evidence that we have, and that seems to be the primary accepted hypothesis, is that water originated from asteroids. Continuing with our discussion of space is the idea of a Goldilocks zone. And this is based off of the children's tale of Goldilocks and the Bears, essentially with the idea that there's a perfect happy medium range of what's ideal. And in this case, it's to do with supporting life and the availability of water and temperatures. Too close to a sun and the water boils off easily because it's too hot, too far away from the sun, and the water freezes because it's too cold. And so there's this range of ideal conditions that allows life that is dependent on water to be able to survive because of its liquid state. And Earth is within that Goldilocks zone, as we can see, and astronomers have discovered about 40 billion planets that reside within the Goldilocks zone within our galaxy. And so the more planets that are within that zone, the more potential for extraterrestrial life that would require water, like on our planet. And so maybe someday we'll discover more planets that could support life because of their need for water, just like our species on Earth.